To Ms. Brennan's AP World History Extravaganza. This series of lectures will take us back about 3 million years ago, and over the course, we'll work our way up to present day. I just want to introduce myself before we dive into the material. My name is Jen Brennan. I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania. There's more cows than people there. And I also have a tendency to talk really fast. I'm working on it, but if it's an issue during the lecture for you, just there's a button on the video slide. You can just slow it down. I got my undergrad from Mansfield University in secondary social studies education. And about a year and a half into teaching, I went back to school and I got my master's in human resources and educational leadership. Been described as a lot of things, but my four favorites, dog lover. Those are my two adorable dogs. That's Belle and Lily. You'll probably hear me talk about them a lot. You'll hear them playing in the background, the occasional bark, the occasional shush. I also have two cats, Felix and Oscar. You probably won't hear them as much, but when you do, it's very loud and obnoxious. They tend to fight a lot. It's great. It's great. Chocolate enthusiast. Chocolate makes me happy. Chocolate makes everybody happy. Coffee addict. As you can see in the picture, I love my coffee. I need my coffee. Coffee is necessary for survival. I can't stress that enough. And what I love about coffee, in addition to its deliciousness and caffeine-filled properties, coffee actually dominated the global trading market for about 100 years. We'll get to that later. Coffee was discovered in Ethiopia in 1000, and 500 years later became one of the most important trading commodities in two, not one, but two of the world's major trade networks. And it'll be a great unit. And finally, most importantly, I'm an AP World History fanatic. I love history. I love everything about history. I love teaching it. I love talking about it. My favorite topic is the Tudors, specifically the Wars of the Roses and what happened around Henry VII into Elizabeth I. That being said, welcome everyone, and let's get started. All right, a little disclaimer I want to give. I am never going to tell you what to believe. It is not my job to teach you what to believe. I'm going to teach you the curriculum. I'm going to teach you how to think like a historian, how to write like a historian. But if there are certain aspects of what I'm saying that you choose to not believe, that is totally fine. What we are going to start with, though, is the evolution of humans, the Paleolithic era, and the Neolithic Revolution. And a couple of things that might be new to you are the terminology used when it comes to actually describing the years. So you've probably seen BC and AD. BC, before Christ, AD, Anno Domini, year of the Lord. They've been used throughout history. They've been used in pretty much every single textbook I had ever seen until I started taking college level history courses and then teaching this class. And historians and anthropologists are trying to create a truly global perspective on history. And because of that, have changed BC to BCE, before Common Era, and AD to CE, Common Era. Now, the years themselves have not changed. We're still looking at 3 million BCE is the same thing as 3 million BC. There is no year zero. So we end at 1 BCE, we start at 1 CE. And one thing that you really want to keep in mind when you are studying history is it's very, very hard to look at any event and separate your personal experience and separate your bias from the facts. But this is AP World History. Facts, not feelings. So in every single video on here, you're going to see a timeline. Pause the video if you want to take a few seconds just to look through it. You're actually going to see the same timeline in two videos. The second when we get into the first civilizations. And also in every video, you're going to see the key concepts that are taken from the AP World History curriculum. Again, pause it, look at it, study it, take notes, move on. That being said, speaking of note taking, I really do recommend that you jot down some notes when we're going over the key concepts and when we're going over the actual content in this lecture. The reason I do these lectures is because I tend to not lecture in class. We'll be focusing on the skills required to think and to read and to write like a historian. All right, so we're going to get started with African Genesis and the beginning of man. And at the bottom, you'll see the different ages. The Paleolithic era is pretty much the beginning of studied time in history, 2.5 million years ago. Earlier, I said 3 million years ago. When you're looking at before writing, before there's really any documentation, 500,000 years really isn't that big a deal. But anyway, Paleolithic era begins 2.5 million years ago, and it really ends about 10,000 BCE. So we're looking at 2,500,000 BCE to 10,000 BCE. And then we're going to move on to the Neolithic Revolution, which starts about 10,000 BCE, the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age. Now, the oldest traces of human DNA are found in the San people. And if you are a fan of science, there's a way you can combine your love of history and your love of science, anthropology. Forensic anthropologists have actually studied human DNA. They've run tests. Don't ask me how they do it. I have no idea. And they've actually been able to trace DNA back to the San people, also called the Kalahari Bushmen. And these are people who still live the traditional hunter-gatherer way of life. Their territory is quite expansive, as you can see. Botswana, Zambia, South Africa. You're really going to want to study the map because one of the most important things in AP World History is knowing your geography. Now, one thing that I find incredibly interesting about human beings is the fact that 99.9% of our DNA is mutual. It overlaps. It is the 0.1% that makes me look the way I look and you look the way you look. All right, so milestones in human evolution. So really where we're going to start is looking at human ancestors. Now, what we do know is that the first modern humans appeared in Africa around 200,000 BCE. And humans belong to the group homonyms, which are modern day humans and their ancestors, but not chimps, gorillas, or orangutans. And scientists actually use Charles Darwin's theory of evolution from the 19th century to explain human changes. And where we start is Australopithecus africanus. And that is the most definite human ancestor that we know of because there is one piece of evidence that we'll get to that in a few minutes. Australopithecus africanus appears about 4 million to 2 million BCE. And it is the earliest example of bipedalism or walking on 2 feet. We move on to Homo habilis, which is the handy human, 2.8 million BCE to about 1.5 million BCE. This is the first example of stone tools being used, and Homo habilis was actually the first human ancestor to leave Africa. Next up, we have Homo erectus, the upright man. So our first human ancestor to actually walk straight posture, upright, not dragging their hands around. Homo erectus goes back from 1.9 million BCE to 70,000 BCE. And if you think about all of those years that we've just talked about, 70,000 BCE really isn't that long ago. And Homo erectus originated in Africa and migrated to Eurasia. We think they're probably the first to use fire. Unfortunately, we don't have any definitive proof of when fire was used until about 10,000 BCE because we know that fire was used to transform pottery, and it made clay pots very hard, didn't break as easily. The first kiln, if you will. And this is Lucy. Lucy is an example of Australopithecus africanus. She was discovered in Ethiopia, and historians guess she's about 3.2 million years old. By using carbon dating, historians and anthropologists are able to sort of pinpoint a time of years. But again, guys, remember what I said, when you're looking at millions of years, a couple 100,000 off really isn't that big of a deal. So it's estimated anywhere from about 3.5 to 3, so 3.2 million years ago is that nice middle number. This is what was found of Lucy, and these are the bones. And if you look in the middle picture, reconstruction has been done to show us what she probably looked like. And then the final image is facial reconstruction. Again, if you're interested in science history, great way to combine them. Which is pretty cool if you think about it. There's no way, even 100 years ago, that scientists would know what Lucy looked like. This is a lot of computer reconstruction. It's a very cool thing we can do. All right, human evolution. We know that Australopithecines and modern humans are hominids. They're members of the primate family. And hominids, such as our earliest ancestor, Australopithecus, were distinguished from other primates by three very important characteristics. Bipedalism, as we discussed, upright walking, a large brain, and a larynx located low in the neck. That gives us the ability to form words and to communicate with each other. And scientists have guessed that this gives us an advantage when it comes to struggling for survival, especially during the changes that would occur in the Great Ice Age. And further changes, again, it's all about survival of the fittest, folks. About 2 to 3 million years ago, are thought to have been the cause of the transformation or the evolution from Australopithecus to Homo habilis. And Homo habilis' brain was about 50% larger. And a million years ago, Homo habilis was extinct, and they're replaced by Homo erectus. Homo erectus then evolves. We then get the Neanderthal and then Homo sapiens. And what we do know is that Neanderthals were extinct, and the most likely theory about that is Neanderthals and Homo sapiens actually intermarried, and Homo sapiens have the stronger genes. So, interpreting some of the evidence that we have, how do we know that there was such a thing as a Homo habilis or Homo erectus? Well, two of them are the Java man and the Peking or the Beijing man. And using carbon dating, using genetic coding, reconstructing DNA helps scientists track evolution to about 5 million years ago. And I do want to show you some pictures of the remains of two Homo erectus men. The Java man, a skull cap was found, and the Peking or the Beijing man. And the Java man is about 1.8 million years old and was discovered by Eugene Du Bois in 1891. And this sort of changed the game. And the idea originally was that Homo erectus originated in Asia. But by tracing back the years and carbon dating, scientists realized that the Java man actually lived from about 1 million to 500,000 years ago. And the Beijing man goes back about 1 million years. And there's some argument over who actually discovered the Beijing man. And the actual skull cap, and as you can see, it's a bit bigger than the Java man. It allowed for an easier reconstruction of the jaw, was discovered by a scientist named W.C. Pei. But quite often, the discovery is credited to a man named Davidson Black. Black is credited with the discovery, not because he found the remains, but because he secured the funding and then identified the remains from a very comfortable chair in an office somewhere. We also know the Neanderthal lived from about 500,000 BCE to 250,000 BCE. And again, we're not sure exactly when they first appeared, but we do know by 40,000 BCE they were extinct. And remains of Neanderthals and stone tools were found in Western Europe and Central, North, and Western Asia. Both Homo erectus and Homo sapiens migrated from Africa to various parts of Europe and various parts of Asia. And they were able to do this because it was during the Ice Age and there were lower sea levels. Homo sapiens, after appearing about 200,000 BCE, after intermarrying with Neanderthals, began migrating. And during the wet period, which was about 40,000 years ago, they were able to cross a land bridge. And they would arrive in the Americas. Again, we're not exactly sure, but about 14,000 years ago is when they'll arrive in North and South America. And in addition, the lower sea levels during this period allowed Homo sapiens to reach Japan and New Guinea and Australia. And these migrations are accompanied by very, very minor physical evolutionary changes. Again, guys, remember 99.9% of our DNA overlaps. We have that in common. And it's the 0.1%. So when you think about eye color, hair color, skin pigmentation, that's 0.1%. And what you see here is an actual map of the African Genesis theory, the out of Africa theory of human migration. And looking at the colors, you can see 100,000 years ago, Africa and Asia, and then moving up into parts of Europe, traveling throughout Asia, and then finally going to Australia or into the Americas. And the land bridge, the Varangian land bridge that allowed Homo sapiens to travel from Asia into North America and then eventually into South America. Um, as we move on, the Paleolithic Stone Age, we talked about before, earliest use of stone tools, about 2.6 million years ago. Sorry, guys, we seem to be stuck. There we go. And we're back. Almost. There we go. Okay. Thank you. We're back again. As I was saying, earliest use of stone tools, 2.6 million years ago to about 10,000 BCE. And at this time, humans are hunter-gatherers. And it's divided into the Paleolithic Old Stone Age and then the Neolithic New Stone Age. And there's also the Mesolithic era, but a lot of people actually just put the Mesolithic era into the Paleolithic era, because the Neolithic era is so different than the Paleolithic, the New Stone Age versus the Old Stone Age. Because in the New Stone Age, the Neolithic Revolution, the agricultural revolution, you have the change of people going from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers. The diet of the average person during the Stone Age was actually pretty diverse. It consisted of foraged vegetables, seeds, root crops, more than meat. And during the Stone Age is when you actually have a very egalitarian society, because females are the gatherers. And the reason that females are the gatherers is because if you've ever seen an infant, they're really small. It's a little scary, actually. They're very small. They're helpless. They need constant care. And because women were the ones who delivered the children and then fed the children, they were forced to stick close to the campsite, forced to watch the children. Therefore, they became gatherers. And in addition, this requirement of having to care for a child, and due to the fact that humans are very slow to mature as compared to animals, you have a two-parent family. And because the women would gather, the men would go out and hunt. Now, here's the thing, guys. Men, you're hunting with sharp sticks. You are hunting with spears. If you're lucky, you have an atlatl to help you throw the spear even further. But you're probably not going to bring home a buffalo or a bear or an antelope or a gazelle every single day. So the women were the ones who were creating that responsible, plentiful, reliable food source. And because of that, everyone's equal. Now, obviously, when the men would bring home that 500-pound beast, woohoo, we're going to eat for 3 weeks off of this. But did that happen every day? No. Luckily, hunter-gatherers probably had to spend no more than about 3 to 5 hours a day getting food, clothing, and shelter, and that left plenty of time for a distinct culture to develop, along with religion. And cave art suggests that the Stone Age people did possess religious beliefs. There is cave art that shows hunting scenes, animals, and what we do know is that the early humans were probably polytheistic, and they also seem to understand that fertility from the earth, rich soil, fertility in women, reproducing, that seems to carry over. And there are a number of sculptures and a number of drawings that what we can best guess represents some kind of fertility goddess. And we also know that because of burial practices, we know that they believed in some kind of afterlife. There are bodies buried with tools and jewelry. And we've also seen the bodies of children, as you can see on the very top, carefully laid out. There are toys in there. And a great example of the afterlife is seen in the Mungo Man. And Mungo Man goes back to about 40,000 BCE, and he was found by Lake Mungo in Australia. And the Mungo Man was buried. I have a picture that I do want to show you. But he was buried with beads not native to mainland Australia, but found in Tasmania and New Guinea. And this is important because it shows us that long distance trade was happening in 40,000 BCE. Well, this is just not working for me right now. All right. I'll bring up a picture of the Mungo Man in a bit. I do want to get started on the agricultural revolution. And the map you can see are early centers of plant and animal domestication. And the agriculture began about 10,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago, anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 BCE. And domestication of plants and animals begins in smaller contained locations at about 9,400 BCE. And we have 3 major civilizations that begin popping up. Now, by our standards, these are just small towns, but these are the very first permanent settlements that are appearing. And what we have are a people called the Natufians who are going to begin settling in Palestine and southern Syria. And they're the first ones who begin deliberately planting figs and grains. And our 3 major settlements are Jericho, An Gazel, and Katal Hayuk. So what we see at first it's all trial and error. Things that don't grow well are ignored, and plants that seem to thrive are deliberately planted, and then people come back to that area later. And the first stage is that semi-cultivation. The next stage is the use of fire to clear the fields. And then specialized tools are used to plant and harvest grain. Later, early farmers would use something called swidden agriculture, and that's changing fields periodically as the soil would lose its nutrients. And the transition to agriculture, the transition to agriculture took place first in the Middle East. But it's important to remember that it's going to take place at different times throughout the world. That's why there's really no specific start date. What's also very important to know about domestication animals is they generally weren't used for their meat. They were used for their milk. If you're going to live off an animal, you can't really just kill it and eat it because then there's no animal left. That's not to say that certain animals weren't killed for meat. We know they were. But sheep and goats were used for wool and milk. And there are some exceptions to the domestication of animals because in the Americas, there were no animals suitable for domestication except llamas and guinea pigs. Some birds, and because of that, hunting remains the main source of meat, and humans, the main source of labor. Llamas really don't pull anything. They can carry things, but they won't pull them. And as a result, you still have human labor. And in certain parts of Central Asia and Africa, the environment couldn't actually support agriculture, but it could support pastoralists who would then herd cattle or other animals to graze. And most researchers agree humans made the transition from hunter-gatherer to agriculture or pastoralist anywhere between 600 to 2000 BCE. What you need to know, though, is as these people are settling in one location, there are massive environmental changes that are happening. You've got deforestation, depletion of nutrients, which is going to cause people to move from one place or another. Now, getting back to the Tufans, we've got our first major city, which is Jericho. And Jericho appeared anywhere from 8300 to 7500 BCE. And Jericho harvested barley and wheat, figs and lentils, and they also collected salt by boiling water from the Dead Sea, because the more grain you eat, the more salt you have to take in. Jericho was also a walled city of 8 to 10 acres, and because of these walls and because of a central tower, we know that there had to be some kind of central leadership so that labor could be mobilized. Somebody's got to be the boss. And I'm sure many people weren't volunteering to build that wall. So you've got to have somebody who can say, nope, you're going to do this, go. All right, next city is An-Gazel, which made its appearance around 7,250 BCE. They went to about 6,500 BCE, and they're in modern-day Jordan. And we don't know a lot about An-Gazel, but their claim to fame is that they had these unique burial traditions where they would remove the head of a loved one and bury the head under their house. And it was sort of a way to revere that person who had passed away. And they also built these rather haunting statues. And these are actually the first statues that replicate a human likeness. And just those eyes, I mean, I kind of feel like they're watching me right now. They're made from shells. And An-Gazel also harvested grains and lentils, and they raised goats in addition to hunting wild animals. And finally, Çatalhöyük. Located in modern-day Turkey, and Çatalhöyük is very unique in the fact that there were no walls and there were no roads. People traveled a bit differently in Çatalhöyük, and how they did that was each residence, home or residence, had a hole in the roof, and people would use a ladder to climb out of that hole, and they would walk on the rooftops to get to their destination and then climb down the ladder. Gives a whole new meaning to the words drop in, doesn't it? Oh, come on, you know it's funny. Homes showed painting of animals, hunters, and gods, and many homes had paintings of bulls and rams. They also had mounted heads of these animals, and that suggests an animal worship. The remains of people found in and around Çatalhöyük actually show a number of healed fractures. Apparently, it really wasn't that uncommon for people to fall off the ladders or fall off the roofs and break a bone. It happens. There were also clear class distinctions in Çatalhöyük, and we know this because there had to be a specialization of labor. In addition to crops, there were ceramic pots used, tools, jewelry, and textiles. And Catalhayuk was also very well known for its use of obsidian, and that is hardened volcanic rock. Obsidian is incredibly pretty. It's also incredibly sharp. You can break off obsidian at an angle and create a very, very powerful weapon, but you can also make it in the jewelry. Farmers ultimately displaced and outnumbered foragers. Couple of reasons. One, if you have an area that is growing a lot of crops, you can support a large population. So now that there was a conflict between hunter gatherers and farmers would always win because they would always band together and there's more of them. They have surpluses that allow them to survive crises and droughts. Hunter gatherers don't. And because they're also living in these communities, disease is going to spread, but those who survive disease become immune. And when hunter gatherers are exposed to these diseases, they're not immune and they die. Again, just talking about some culture, early food producers worship nature spirits and ancestor spirits, and the religion of these early city states tended to focus on wild animals, the Mother Earth, and the sky god. And a lot of these beliefs are reflected in ancient Hindu texts. Early food producing societies also used megaliths, which were big stones to construct burial chambers and calendar circles to help them tell time. And these are some of the megaliths that are still around. And some of them, I mean, y'all know what Stonehenge is, but the Eastern Island heads, those are also megaliths. And sometimes they're just a simple, what looks like door frame. Other times they're these incredible mounted rocks. No one knows exactly for sure how they did it. Probably a lever pulley system. And our slide here is our conclusion, just things that we've gone over, a quick review for you. I always suggest pausing it, take your time, and go over it. Now, I know this one was a little longer. The rest of them will not be as long, but we're just working our way through. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. Otherwise, have a great night, guys.